Welcome, everybody. It's fun to see the waiting room filling up and folks getting admitted to our very first Wetland Coffee Break today, the Wisconsin Wetlands Association and our guest Titus Seilheimer from the Wisconsin Sea Grant. Very excited to have him here today, trying out this new world of online presentations. It's kind of fun, something we've been wanting to do for a while, and now we get the, what is it, the adversity is the, what's that quote, Titus? Do you know what I'm talking about here? Mother of invention?
Mother of invention, I think.
Sarah Johnson, welcome. Tracy Hames, hi there. And we're going to get started in just a few minutes. We got a lot of people coming into the waiting room, and so we are just waiting for that to happen. Hope everybody's doing well. For one, the sun is shining where I am, and I'm happy about that. The days are easier and more fun when there's sunshine to see out the window and when I go on my dog walk.
No sun here in northeastern Wisconsin, unfortunately.
Oh dear. Well, maybe it'll come to you later.
Yep.
It is odd having walked around in shorts on Tuesday and then wearing like a hat and full-on mittens again yesterday. But that's life in Wisconsin in April, right? That's just our norm. Right. That's right.
And Sunday, up to a foot of snow. So
oh, great.
We'll see what happens.
Okay. Well, you know, for that could be fun. We could turn that into something fun.
Yep.
Since it's 10:30, I'm going to get started, and we'll just continue to welcome folks for another couple of minutes into our waiting room, or from our waiting room into the presentation. My name is Katie Belfus. I'm the Outreach Programs Director with Wisconsin Wetlands Association, and really delighted to have all of you with us today and getting used to the strange feeling of talking into a computer with nobody in front of me, because I'm used to live things, right? And so trying this new thing out. Thank you for helping keep us connected during this time of social distancing. And I wanted to invite our guests also to join us every Friday morning at 10:30 for the next couple of weeks at least. Next week we'll have Gary Casper on to talk about the Herp Mapper, which is a web and app-based tool for reporting observations of herps and reptiles, amphibians and reptiles. The following week we'll have Ryan O'Connor from the DNR talking about Wisconsin wetland types. And if there's a particular topic or presenter you'd really like to see on here, please let me know. Programs@wisconsinwetlands.org, and I'll put that in the comments, or the chat rather. And if you are interested in being a speaker because you have something to share, you can also let me know, and I'd be happy to give a chat with you about that. We will do the presentation followed by a Q&A at the end, and we are going to do the Q&A via the chat function. And so if you mouse, if you're new to Zoom and you're still figuring out how to go, if you mouse around the bottom of your screen, you'll find the chat box and you can enter your questions there. And I'll relay your questions to Titus at the end. We have started you on mute and video off, and just so we can keep things clean, that would be great if you'd keep it that way. And you probably know you can control how the presenter appears on your screen, move his little face out of the way if it's blocking the cool slides that he's about to show you. So it's hard to give you tips on how to do that because everybody's computer works a little bit different depending on what kind of system you're working on. So let me introduce Titus without further ado. We had a nice joke about having last names that nobody knows how to pronounce, so we bonded over that one. I'd like to introduce Titus Seilheimer, a fisheries specialist with Wisconsin Sea Grant. He's worked on all 5 Great Lakes during his 18 years of experience working in coastal wetlands. He's based in Manitowoc, where there's no sunshine today apparently, and he enjoys spending time surveying the fish species in the Little Manitowoc River Marsh. We are so happy to have him joining us here today. Thank you, Titus. Welcome.
All right, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this first coffee break. I am always happy to talk to people about coastal wetlands and about fish. So this is a great combination for me. I am going to take you on sort of a whirlwind tour around all 5 Great Lakes. I'll also talk in a little more detail about Wisconsin's Great Lake coastal wetlands as well, and link that up to wetland science, wetland fish science, and some local examples from near me in Manitowoc. So first, some introductions. This is our Great Lakes. This is from April 5th. So one of the rare times that at least most of the Great Lakes are visible And we do have more than 10,000 miles of coastline around the Great Lakes. So US and Canada, that's a lot of coastline. And for us, just in Wisconsin, we have 820 miles of coastline. And that very much makes Wisconsin a Great Lakes, coastal Great Lakes state. I mean, we are coastal just as much as, Massachusetts and Oregon. We are a coastal state. And with coastal states come coastal wetlands. Throughout the Great Lakes, there is a great diversity in the types of coastal wetlands that we have. The example here on the slide is it's Lake Huron, Georgian Bay coastal wetland. I think the hint there, if you're familiar with sort of the northern part of Lake Huron, is the exposed granite. And it is really a spectacular place to visit if you ever get a chance. What we're looking at here is really the sort of the range and diversity and spatial distribution of wetlands throughout the Great Lakes. So there are, on this map, this comes from a project with lots of partners that are looking at coastal wetlands around the Great Lakes, and these are just those wetlands that are greater than 4 hectares. And what we're looking at is kind of 3 different types of wetlands. The barrier types, those are protected wetlands in orange. The yellow are coastal or lacustrine coastal wetlands, and then the riverine in blue, so associated with a river mouth. In general, I think looking around, you can see, I'll try out this, if I bring the laser pointer up here, there are areas like a lot of Wisconsin's Lake Michigan coastline where currently there are not many coastal wetlands. We can also go up to sort of the northern part of Lake Superior, not a lot of coastal wetlands. And there are various reasons for that, why there may or may not be coastal wetlands in the area, and I will talk about that coming up. Just to give you some ideas about what the types of wetlands are, we do have, at least from a fish perspective, this is one of the most important as a fish ecologist. It's the marsh system, coastal marshes, which are a mix of emergent and submergent vegetation, and I will also talk about that a bit more in the coming slides. The picture here, this is Turkey Point, which is actually a privately managed wetland in Lake Erie on the Ontario side of Lake Erie. So a very large kind of waterfowl hunting club manages that wetland, but very, very large area of coastal wetland. We can also look at embayments. So embayments are, a more protected type of marsh. This is Cloud Bay, which is just south of Thunder Bay in Lake Superior. And you can see in the picture here, so the picture behind is actually facing this kind of ridge right here. And then the protected embayment, this is all fairly protected from Lake Superior, and it allows for this area on the left side of the bay to have a pretty extensive wetland. So lots of wild rice in there, good fish habitat, but also protected from kind of the more harsh environment of Lake Superior. We also have a single river delta in the Great Lakes, and if you think, Mississippi River Delta is probably the delta you've heard about, and that is traditionally kind of this bird foot shape right here. So you can see these kind of abandoned channels, a lot of diversity there, and in past river channels. And this is our kind of single example of that type in the Great Lakes, and that is where the St. Clair River, which flows out of Lake Huron, empties into Lake St. Clair. We also have what is considered to be the world's largest freshwater estuary, and that is really all of Green Bay. We can kind of categorize that as a freshwater estuary. You know, a lot of if you're on a salty coast and you're an estuary scientist, there's some grumbling from those folks about, well, you can't have an estuary in the Great Lakes because it's all fresh water. And, you know, sort of the typical definition of an estuary is where the fresh water flowing in from the river meets the salt water from the ocean, and there's kind of this brackish mixing. And although we don't have salt water, we do have two very distinct water chemistries. We have the water coming off the watershed is chemically distinct from that water in the lake itself, and that mixing zone is why we kind of characterize this as a very large estuary and a very interesting set of habitats in Green Bay. Another sort of distinct coastal wetland type is the drowned river mouth, fairly common on the Michigan side of Lake Michigan. And, really a great kind of historical example. We're looking at glacial history here, what that lake is. So you can see this is that, drowned river mouth lake over in White Lake. And, what that actually is an old river valley. So you have this meandering, river, the existing river right here. So the river flows into the lake now. But when the water levels were much lower, over the last 10,000 years, Lake Michigan water levels have been very high, they've been very low. And we're actually seeing an example of that where this river meandered, carved this valley out when the shoreline was much lower. And when the lake came up to its current levels, it flooded that valley. And that's what we have on those drowned river mouths. And if we, head over to White River, we can look at that, the lake here, but then pretty extensive wetland complexes above that in the river mouth, the ends of the river. And, places like Muskegon, Ludington, you can go to those areas and they're pretty significant coastal wetlands. So why do we care about wetlands? I think that's a good question to kind of ask and think about. It's not just about fish. They do provide very significant ecosystem services. So, there have been some valuations of these, wetland services, I think, for the Great Lakes. And, we're talking billions or trillions of dollars in value of services that coastal wetlands provide. So, in terms of flood control, they can help, alleviate some of that flooding that might happen. Wetlands provide shoreline protection, so they can, prevent, especially with, vegetation, breaking up wave action and protecting shoreline and water filtration as well. Coastal wetlands are very, very productive systems. They're able to really draw out a lot of nutrients. They can help settle sediment and, improve water clarity. And, that's a very important service. And, unfortunately, in many cases, sort of the inputs from the watersheds are even too much for these wetlands to deal with. But, they do still provide some of those services that, maybe you don't care about fish, but there are other services that are being provided. Why talk about wetlands, for fish? Well, they are a very important environment for Great Lakes fishes. In terms of diversity of fish, a great diversity of species are supported by these coastal wetlands. It's diverse habitat as well, in terms of structure, in terms of species. And, coastal wetlands provide very important spawning and nursery habitat for many species. How does it look today? Well, we've had, coastal wetlands are sort of right on the, a lot of them, they're right on the edge of the Great Lakes. They tend to be, if you think of urban areas, if you've gone to an urban area, you tend to see a lot of sheet piling, a lot of dredging going on in those river mouths and those harbors. And, 300 or 400 years ago, you're probably looking at an area where those river mouths would have contained coastal wetlands. So, throughout the Great Lakes, there have been a lot of lost wetlands. Places like Lake Erie have been especially hit hard with wetland loss, and urban areas as well have really lost pretty significant amounts. And on the map here, I've got kind of this area, and this again are those 4-hectare wetland points. And there's a big gap here in Wisconsin's coastline. And places like Milwaukee, hundreds of years ago, the Milwaukee Estuary was full of wild rice. It was basically a great fish habitat area, and now it's a very industrial harbor. So we do have those examples of maybe future endpoints, and there is a lot of effort going on now to return some of these areas to more natural wetland habitat. Zooming in a bit on some of our Lake Michigan habitats for the Wisconsin side of the lake and Lake Michigan, we do it's mainly these lacustrine, so sort of exposed wetlands. And in general, if you look at the west shore of Lake Michigan, there's quite a few of these sort of exposed coastal wetland types. Also a mix of the blue and the green riverine and barrier types. If we take a trip up to Lake Superior, it's a different system up there. Much deeper water in Lake Superior, different coastal geology and landscape. And so really it's the riverine systems up there that dominate. It's hard to have kind of that lacustrine system because, lots of wave action happening, much colder water as well. So you need that protection. And in Lake Superior for Wisconsin, that protection is from those riverine environments. The ecology of coastal wetlands, it's pretty interesting systems, real mix of different species. And it's a fascinating area, I think. It's right on that interface. So this is called the land-water interface. So on the right side, we have, this is the open water, this is the lake. And on the left, we have the upland, that's the forest. And it's really a very dynamic environment here between the land and the water. We have different zones of vegetation, and for fish habitat, we're really looking at the marsh here. So we have that emergent zone, we have that submergent zone. So sort of diverse species, different structures in there for plants, but also on top of that is that dynamic nature of water levels. So, anyone who's been around the Great Lakes recently has seen nearly a 6-foot increase in water levels. And so that is, you can imagine where a 6-foot range of water levels would push, your water is now up here, and these what were shrubs or meadows are now sort of underwater. And you can actually see the plants will move up and down in response to that. Pretty diverse set of species in wetlands, from large to small. Jute and Pappas, this is sort of a classic paper looking at, they basically went through all the fish throughout the Great Lakes and then looked at their life history and tried to identify those species that were reliant on coastal wetlands in some way. And they had 3 different classes of species here: those wetland obligate species that lived in wetlands, the transitional that spent some time in wetlands or relied on wetlands in some way during their life, and then the Great Lakes species that had no connection to wetlands. And I think the big number here is nearly 3/4 of all fish species in the Great Lakes had some use of coastal wetlands at some point. So, really that's sort of the far-reaching impact of coastal wetlands. It's addressing species all over the place. But of course, not just fish species are using these wetlands, also diverse amphibians, reptiles, mammals like muskrats that get into our nets, chew holes in them, and then make us repair those nets. That's sort of a part of our job as fish wetland scientists. Lots of birds using those coastal wetlands, including some of these obligate species that need wetland habitat. for their life cycle. We have invertebrates, very diverse set of invertebrates, lots of different aquatic insects that are important part of the food chain in those wetlands as well. We have distinctive vegetation zones in these habitats as well that are important to think about with fish habitat. Things like the emergent zone, whether you have things like bulrush or cattails or phragmites are a big aquatic issue in a lot of coastal wetlands. The floating zone, those floating plants, and then the submergent zone. The submergent vegetation, really important sort of diversity. I imagine this is sort of the forest of the wetland with a lot of different structure. How do we study wetlands? In my work, so starting back in 2001, I started my graduate work at McMaster University with Pat Fraser. She's a wetland scientist there. And, we kind of looked at the whole suite of habitat, plants, algae, zooplankton, water quality and water chemistry. And this has, been sort of the base of a lot of that work. It's understanding the overall condition of these habitats, and then being able to connect that with fish as well. So we looked at the physical, the chemical, the nutrients in those waters, and then also surveyed the fish. And there are a lot of different ways to survey fish. It depends on the types of gear you might have, the time, the resources. From the simplest, like a beach seine, which you can just encircle fish. And it works fairly well. It's fairly simple, fairly inexpensive. Although on the flip side, it's also can have some issues with if you have a lot of plants. Fike nets are something I've used pretty extensively and continue to use today. It's a net you set overnight. It's passive and it works pretty well at capturing fish in these shallow environments. Electrofishing as well, if you have that option, using electricity to stun fish. Where I've been interested in fish in wetlands is because fish are a great biotic indicator. And why they're good indicators? Well, fish spend a lot of time in water. That makes sense. They do, as multi-year species, a fish might live 2 or 3 years or 5 to 10 years. And, we can go into a wetland, we can grab some water, we can measure the nutrients at that point. But that is really just a point measurement. The fish can kind of tell us a longer story about conditions when we're not there. And, one of that ways we can do, or things we can do, is we can take what we have here as an ordination with the fish species in relation to the different water quality variables. And so what I did for part of my graduate work was to look at fish across wetlands, across the Great Lakes, and develop an index called the Wetland Fish Index that would allow you to take a list of fish species and then draw some conclusions about what is happening in that wetland. And for the Wetland Fish Index, we were able to score wetlands from 1 to 5, with 1 being the lowest condition of wetland based on fish, to 5 being the highest. And one of the sort of local examples, we were able to take a historic fish database that John Brazier, then when he was a grad student at UW-Madison, went out and sampled wetlands throughout Green Bay in the early 90s and published this fish list. And they had done a lot of analysis that showed this gradient in quality for wetlands, from lowest quality in the south to highest quality in the north, based on a lot of different factors. And we were able to take that list of fish, calculate our scores, and we found this gradient using the Wetland Fish Index was similar to that other analysis that they had done with a lot more sort of effort. So lowest quality in the south and increasing the highest quality in the north. And just to wrap up, I think I've gone about 20 minutes, but just sort of some final thoughts about degraded wetlands. And This is the Little Manitowoc River Marsh, which is in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. And it's a fairly small wetland, but it also has a pretty altered watershed, but it also provides valuable fish habitat. And so, even in sort of these more degraded sites, we do still see diverse species, central mud minnow, creek chubs living in there, banded killifish right here. And that was from the Wetland Fish Index, a fairly sensitive species. So, still being able to support that species. And multiple years of successful northern pike spawning we've been able to document. So this is a young of the year northern pike, spawned within close to that marsh, and then spending its sort of early life in that marsh. And to present, we've documented within this fairly small wetland that does have degraded conditions, 24 fish species. And I think especially where we're at in the watershed, we're in that, there's not a lot of wetland habitat near the Little Manitowoc River, and it provides more habitat than just the exposed shoreline. So it's a important site. And sort of our take-home message is that coastal wetlands are vital to the health of Great Lakes and also to those Great Lakes fisheries. So with that, thanks for joining today, and I've got plenty of time for questions. I can stay as long as you want.
Great.
Until I have to eat lunch.
Thank you so much. I have a couple of questions here that have come up in the chat box for you, Titus.
All right.
What is there in the research that you've seen? Is there a relationship between vegetation quality and fish use of coastal wetland habitats?
I don't know that it's always specifically to quality. I think that there is, there's the relationship between water quality, habitat condition, which is, very directly related to the vegetation quality as well. And then, I think it's, there's sort of, multiple things happening in terms of the fish. They need a certain water quality, which supports that, better habitat in terms of plants, and then that supports the better fish assemblages, sort of the more sensitive species. So I think yes, that you can definitely document that.
Well, the second part of the question was having to do with water quality. So you did a great job and answered both of them without even knowing that was a two-part question. So well done.
Excellent.
Another question from the chat: what impact have invasive species, including zebra and quagga mussels, had on Great Lakes wetlands?
Yeah, good question. I mean, there are, I think, one of the early, big impact to coastal wetlands are species like common carp. Common carp are, especially during spawning time, they'll go into wetlands and they really can tear up that vegetation. From my graduate lab at McMaster University, before I had started, they had actually done several years of common carp exclusion experimentation, and documenting that if you can keep the carp out, it actually helped the submergent plants to recover pretty well. I think zebra and quagga mussels have not really had a direct impact on coastal wetlands. They're just I think lots of factors. The sediment type, we will see them occasionally attached to plants, but for the most part, they haven't really been that successful in colonizing a lot of these coastal wetlands, which I think is good for the wetland habitats. We have been seeing more round gobies kind of coming in, and that's, I don't know that anyone's looked at that, what those impacts are yet, but probably having some impacts. And then I guess the future, one of the future concerns relative to invasive species would be grass carp. If you've heard about them in the news, that's one of the the Asian carp, one of the 4 Asian carp species. It's not the silver carp, which you've seen jumping in a lot of videos, but it's a grass carp eat vegetation. And currently there is, evidence that they are spawning in Lake Erie, and lots of concern there. I think in the future, if they got into our wetlands and really started eating a lot of that vegetation.
One last question. What is your favorite fish?
Oh, it's a terrible question. I can't, it's like, which of my children is my favorite child? I'm going to go with what is my favorite wetland fish species, because this was a wetland talk. And I think for me, having sampled around all of the Great Lakes, I'm going to name the bowfin as my favorite. If you're not familiar with a bowfin, it's also known as a dogfish. It's a primitive fish. So basically, it's been around for millions of years, hundreds of millions of years. And it's a definite survivor and a pretty unique species.
Well, that was a very diplomatic answer. Having children myself, I understand the challenge there. How do you pick just one?
Yes.
Well, thank you, Titus, so much. We are at 11 o'clock, and so we're going to wind up and let folks get back to their previously scheduled days. But I want to thank you for spending your time and sharing your knowledge with us. And I want to thank all of our guests who joined in for today to hear your presentation. Again, we'll be doing these every Friday at 10:30 for the foreseeable future. Who knows? It could last forever. We'll see. Hopefully, we'll all be out and about back to regular life before too much longer. But in the meantime, let's stay connected with wetlands and with each other through these virtual networks. And we look forward to seeing you again. And thank you again, Titus. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Have a good day, everybody.